Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take complex, dense source material, the articles, the debates, the research, and distill it into highly memorable, actionable knowledge customized just for you.
Today, we're undertaking what you might call the ultimate deep dive.
I think that's fair to say.
We're plunging into the single most foundational philosophical question that has occupied human thought, well, since we first started thinking. Does God exist?
And this isn't just an abstract question, is it? It's so crucial because it defines not just worldviews, but how we even approach things like logic, morality, and justice.
Exactly. And our source material for this is it's pretty unique and incredibly rigorous. We've analyzed the transcript of a major public debate.
Right.
And this debate pitted a highly respected academic Islamic scholar against a prominent, intellectually sharp skeptic and writer.
And they agreed to battle this question using only one weapon, logic. I mean, no appeal to scripture, no appeal to history, just pure reason.
And that's our mission today.
Yep.
It's not to, declare a winner, but to impartially map the intellectual battlefield for you.
We're distilling hours of really high-level philosophical fencing into clear, structured arguments.
We have to focus solely on the strength of their reasoning, exploring the concepts of alcohol that's reasoned out, and, the limits of human experience.
This is a chance to move beyond the usual cultural noise and really understand the core rational mechanics of this age-old conflict.
Okay, let's unpack this setup, because the very ground rules they established are what elevate this from, a shouting match to a proper academic deep dive.
We have to start with that foundational standard, ACL.
Yes, akal, it's the Arabic term for pure intellect and reasoning, was the singular metric for success.
So everything hinged on that.
Everything. The debaters agreed that they must not rely on emotional appeals, cultural traditions, or anything subjective. The only way to prove or disprove the existence of a necessary being was through what they called a definitive argument.
Like 2 + 2 = 4, something you just can't reject logically.
Precisely. That's a brutal standard. If the argument contains a single logical flaw that can't be rectified, it just fails.
And this reliance on ACL, it meant immediately fencing off 2 massive fields of knowledge that usually dominate this conversation.
It did. The first exclusion was scientific evidence, empirical evidence.
Which can feel really counterintuitive today, right? We rely so heavily on science to validate reality.
Of course. But the debaters agreed that science is inherently irrelevant to this specific philosophical question.
So why is that? I mean, science is constantly expanding the boundaries of what we know.
It's because of the constraints of the scientific method itself. Science deals, by definition, with the natural and physical world.
Things you can measure, observe, test,
and reproduce in space and time. So if the entity being argued for, God, is a non-physical supernatural reality, then science is fundamentally the wrong tool for the job.
Okay, so this is the metal detector analogy.
That's the one.
You can have the world's most advanced metal detector, but if you're searching for something made of plastic, the tool, no matter how sophisticated, just can't detect it. It wasn't designed for that reality.
Exactly. It's like understanding the complex mechanism of a watch tells you everything about the gears and the springs, but it tells you nothing about the existence or, the intention of the watchmaker.
Because the watchmaker operates on a different plane of existence than the physical watch.
Right. So even if science someday gave us a perfect, complete explanation for how the universe began, a unified theory of everything, say, the theist argued that this would still only explain contingent processes.
The how, not the ultimate why, or the first cause.
That's the key distinction. Science explains relationships within the natural world. Philosophy asks why the natural world exists at all.
Okay, so that's science. What was the second major exclusion?
Revelation. So no religious texts, no scriptures, no appeals to prophecy.
Wow.
The theist agreed to exclude any citations from scripture, acknowledging that since the skeptic did not accept the authority of those texts, they couldn't serve as a valid shared foundation of proof.
So they had to find common ground.
The goal was to establish knowledge that is accessible and undeniable to all rational human minds, regardless of cultural background or religious starting point.
And this level playing field, stripped down to universal human reason, is precisely what we're exploring. Our mission is to dissect the attempt to find that definitive argument that either logically proves or logically annihilates the idea of a necessary being.
So this really sets the stage for the classical philosophical engine of the debate, which was the theist scholar's opening, the argument based on contingency.
Let's dive deep into this. What is contingency, and why is it the foundation of this entire line of reasoning?
Okay, so contingency is basically the observation that everything we see in the physical universe is dependent. To be contingent means, well, three things.
Okay.
First, that it could exist or not exist. Second, that if it exists, its existence is dependent on external conditions or prior causes.
Right. And third?
And third, that it could have existed in a different form or with different properties.
So my existence is contingent on my parents, on the atmosphere, on this planet. This table I'm at is contingent on the wood, the carpenter, the law of gravity keeping it on the floor.
Exactly. Everything is linked in this chain of dependency.
Everything.
The universe itself, the stars, the physical laws, they all appear to be contingent. They had a temporal beginning, a moment when they did not exist. They obey specific laws that could theoretically be otherwise.
And their continued existence requires external maintenance, like energy and forces.
Right. Nothing in the observable physical reality seems to be self-sufficient or, necessary.
And to make this concept relatable, the theist used that famous visual metaphor, the pink ball analogy.
Yes. The analogy asks you to imagine hiking across a completely isolated, uninhabited island. An island where, factually, no human has ever set foot.
Okay, I'm with you.
And yet, you stumble upon a highly specific manufactured object.
Yeah.
A bright, pink, perfectly spherical ball.
Right. Your first questions are going to be, why is it here? Who made it? Why is it pink?
You would never, ever accept the answer. It just is. Because the ball is contingent, it is clearly dependent on a cause external to the island's natural geology.
Of course.
And the brilliance of the analogy, the theist argued, is that if you expand that pink ball to the size of the entire cosmos, if you make it a universe-sized contingent object, the philosophical nature of the question doesn't change.
Scale is not a philosophical explanation.
Exactly. The universe requires an explanation for its specific existence just as much as the pink ball does.
So if everything we see and experience is contingent, then the philosophical requirement is that the entire system of dependent existence must logically be supported by something that is non-contingent.
This is the core requirement. The necessary being. This entity must be entirely independent, uncaused, and its non-existence must be logically impossible. It is the absolute bedrock of reality that sustains all dependent existence.
But this immediately leads to the skeptic's most famous philosophical defense, right? The infinite regress of causes. The skeptic says, okay, fine. But why must the chain stop? Why can't we simply say universe X was caused by Y and Y by Z and so on, back infinitely?
This is a point where the discussion needed real technical rigor. The theist rebuts the idea of an actual infinite regress as a logical fallacy when dealing with causality.
What's the difference?
Well, while we can conceive of a potential infinite series of numbers like 1, 2, 3, and so on, we cannot in reality traverse an actual infinite series of causes to reach the present moment.
Explain that a bit more. What's the difference between actual and potential infinity here?
A potential infinity is a process that can, in principle, continue indefinitely, like counting numbers. You never reach the end, but the process itself is understandable.
Right.
An actual infinity, however, suggests that an infinite number of events have already been completed to reach this moment.
Ah, I see.
If the chain of causes were truly infinite, we would never have arrived here, because every existing thing would still be awaiting its infinite predecessor to first be actualized.
So for anything to exist now, the chain has to stop somewhere.
Logically, yes. The chain must terminate at an uncaused cause.
That makes the argument for the necessary being less about finding a specific deity with a name and a story, and more about finding a logical starting point for reality itself.
That's it exactly.
Yep.
And once the necessary being is posited as that logical terminus, the debaters then outline the attributes this entity must possess, purely based on logical necessity.
And these attributes they flow directly from that initial definition.
They have to. So number one, it must be independent and non-contingent. That's the definition itself. It depends on nothing.
Otherwise, you're just back to looking for the real cause.
Right. Second, it must be eternal and timeless. If it had a beginning, it would require a cause, which makes it contingent, so it has to exist outside of time.
Okay.
Third, powerful or actualizing. It has
Yeah.
to possess the inherent capability to bring contingent things from a state of non-existence into existence, to turn potential into actual.
And fourth, this one feels like a bigger leap.
Fourth, intelligent and knowledgeable. Now, this is derived from the nature of the contingent reality we observe.
Meaning?
The universe operates with astonishing precision. Specific, highly complex laws of nature, intricate fine-tuning, A mere blind brute force might cause existence, but the order and the specificity of that existence logically require an ultimate cause that is intelligent and knowledgeable.
The cause has to be sufficient to explain the effect.
That's the principle. The analogy they used here was really powerful. You wouldn't look at a functioning complex car engine and say it was created by a random powerful explosion.
No, of course not. Understanding the complexity of the engine actually confirms the intelligence of the designer. It doesn't negate it.
So the theist argued that to propose a powerful but mindless cause for a reality governed by physics and mathematics is just illogical.
But here's where the skeptic launches that sharp counterattack.
Yes.
If we are going to accept that this necessary being must be eternal and uncaused, why do we need an extra entity at all? Why can't the universe itself, or maybe a multiverse, be that eternal, uncaused entity?
And that's the million-dollar question. The theist's response hinges on the definition of time and space. If the universe, as we understand it through cosmology, is bound by time and space, and if time and space themselves had a beginning,
Like the Big Bang suggests.
then the universe is inherently contingent. It had a point when it did not exist.
So if the necessary being is the creator of time, the necessary being must be timeless.
Precisely. And the theists argued that this renders the skeptic's question, what was God doing before the universe, fundamentally illogical.
Because the word before only has meaning within the dimension of time.
A dimension which the necessary being created. It's an invalid concept when applied to a timeless entity. The necessary being isn't before the universe. It is the ground of the universe's existence.
And this also addresses that related critique, the God of the gaps argument.
It does. The skeptic often accuses the theist of using God only to fill in things science hasn't explained yet.
Right. You don't know, therefore, God.
But the theist firmly rejected this. They argued that if science explains thunder with static electricity, that electricity is still contingent. It needs a cause. If science explains the Big Bang with quantum mechanics is still contingent. It needs a cause.
So no matter how detailed the scientific explanation gets, no matter how many gaps are filled, the question of ultimate necessity only gets stronger.
Because every scientific answer is, by definition, an explanation involving contingent forces, matter, or energy.
It's the difference between saying, this car runs because of the combustion cycle, and asking, why is there a combustion cycle, and fuel in the first place?
Exactly. The theist's argument is purely structural, not empirical.
Okay, so once that intellectual groundwork of necessity was laid, the debate shifted powerfully. It moved into epistemology, focusing on how we claim to know things. And this is where the skeptic launched a really aggressive critique of faith.
He did. The skeptic used a very rigid intellectual definition of faith that's common in skeptical circles. For them, faith means believing without witness, proof, reason, or logic.
And they contrasted this sharply with belief.
Yes, the skeptic used the analogy of the North Pole. I believe the North Pole exists because of consistent evidence, verifiable maps, photography, shared testimony. It's a rational belief.
Whereas faith, in their definition, demands you believe in the absence of that kind of justification.
And the writer then stated that applying faith without rational grounds is logically equivalent to stupidity.
That's a strong word. They used a pretty provocative, absurd example, didn't they?
They did. Believing that Elon Musk is your long-lost brother merely because the idea gives you comfort.
It's a claim that is entirely detached from reality and therefore irrational, regardless of any personal comfort it provides.
And the logical implication is this. If religion could meet the standards of Akil, if it were logically definitive, it wouldn't require faith. It would simply require rational belief, just like believing in gravity.
So if a system demands faith, it's an admission that it lacks rational proof.
That's the core of the critique. It's a devastating attack on faith when it's used as a crutch for the illogical.
So how did the theist navigate that? It sounds like a definitional trap.
Well, the theist rebutted by rejecting the skeptic's narrow, pejorative definition entirely. They argued that faith and belief are simply two sides of a coin and can both be true or false.
So the label doesn't matter as much as the truth of the claim itself.
Exactly. The truth of the underlying claim is what matters. The theist argued that their position, if proven by the contingency argument, is a rational faith, or you could call it an evidenced belief.
So they weren't promoting the willful ignorance the skeptic described.
Not at all. They argued they were promoting assent to a logical conclusion that just happens to transcend empirical observation. And they flipped it, saying that rejecting something based purely on emotional disbelief, even if the logic is sound, is just as irrational as believing something without any evidence at all.
Okay, shifting gears a bit, the skeptic then introduced a very powerful element of doubt, the weight of history.
Right. They pointed out that intellectually advanced societies of the past, the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, all believed devoutly in their gods. Jupiter, Ra, Zeus.
These were highly sophisticated societies, yet their gods have completely vanished from serious belief.
And the implication for you, the listener, is clear. If such sophisticated societies could be so profoundly wrong about their foundational beliefs, why should we assume our current beliefs are permanent?
The skeptic basically argued that time moves on, beliefs dissolve, and history suggests modern gods may also be temporary.
Yes, and they pointed to the rising secularism in Western Europe as direct evidence of this intellectual evolution.
The theist, though, had a sharp philosophical counter to this.
They did. They conceded that, yes, Jupiter, Ra, and Zeus are irrelevant, but argued that these were beliefs in contingent beings.
What do you mean by that?
Well, those historical gods had beginnings, limits, wives, domains. They were characterized by very human flaws. They were essentially projections of contingent reality.
So the philosophical debate isn't about those kinds of gods.
No, it's solely focused on the necessary being, which, by definition, is eternal, timeless, and non-contingent. The failings of ancient mythology don't impact the logical requirement for an uncaused cause.
That neatly separates the philosophical argument from the mythological one. And this brings us to that central conflict over who has to prove what. The burden of proof.
And Russell's teapot.
Russell's teapot. So the skeptic claims the burden of proof rests entirely on the theist, right? The one making the positive claim, God exists.
Yes. They cited Bertrand Russell. If I claim an invisible teapot orbits Mars, it is not your job to prove its non-existence. The onus is on me to provide the evidence.
The skeptic argues they are simply the default rational position, demanding evidence for an extraordinary claim.
But this is where the theists push back really strongly. They argued that the burden of proof only shifts if the negative position is one of passive agnosticism. I don't know.
But if the skeptic asserts atheism, God does not exist, that's a positive knowledge claim about reality.
And that, the theist argued, also carries a burden of proof. The theist said they fulfilled their burden by presenting the contingency argument based purely on ACL.
So now the ball is in the skeptic's court.
Exactly. The skeptic's job is not simply to passively refuse the argument, but to actively refute the chain of logical necessity. If the skeptic cannot logically disprove the requirement for a necessary being, then they haven't fulfilled their own burden of proof for the claim of no God.
Wow, that's a fascinating intellectual shift. It forces the atheist to become an active participant in proving the universe is self-sufficient, rather than just waiting for the theist to fail.
And this segment is where the conversation really pivots from the icy logic of necessary existence to the heat of lived human experience.
Right. Once the mind is maybe satisfied with the logical sequence, the heart immediately rebels against the cruelty of the world. We move from aql to the question of justice or insaf and suffering.
The skeptic grounded his ethical argument in a very powerful observation. Justice is a purely human concept.
Meaning what, exactly?
They pointed out that nature is utterly amoral. A flood doesn't choose its victims. A lion doesn't feel guilt for eating a deer. The universe functions on random chance and self-interest, not right and wrong.
So our ideas of justice, our traffic laws, our courts, are just a necessary consensus we created for group survival and order.
They are man-made, not celestial. And the skeptic argued further that the religious promise of eternal justice in the afterlife Akhirah is actually evidence that humans know the system on Earth is broken.
So the idea of divine justice is a comforting projection, something to make up for the unfairness of the natural world.
A projection designed to compensate for that fundamental unfairness and moral vacuum. But the theists argue that justice must be an objective morality that requires a divine foundation.
And without that,
The theists argued, if morality were merely a subjective social consensus, just what the majority agrees upon, then human history provides some terrifying counterexamples.
like Nazi Germany.
That was the explicit example used. If the majority consensus in Nazi Germany justified genocide, and morality is only consensus, then the skeptic has no objective external standard by which to condemn that genocide as fundamentally wrong.
If morality is only a survival mechanism, then the stronger surviving consensus defines what is good.
Exactly. The theists asserted that for justice to be real, universal, and binding, for it to be insaf, it must descend from an all-wise, objective, and eternal source. Without that, morality just dissolves into preference, power, and temporary custom.
And this clash over the origin of morality provided the launchpad for the skeptics' most emotional and really devastating argument,
Yeah.
the problem of evil.
This is the ethical challenge that breaks the logical perfection of the necessary being for so many people.
The skeptic brought the reality of suffering right to the forefront. The overwhelming chaos, the mass tragedies, the innocent children dying in conflicts like Gaza or from preventable diseases.
And the core question is just unshakable. If an omnipotent, omnibenevolent, and omniscient God exists, why is the world organized this cruelly?
The skeptic framed it very pointedly. If God is powerful enough to intervene in small personal matters, finding a job, avoiding a car accident, why does he stand by and permit mass tragedies?
They concluded that if the ruler of this world is all-powerful and the world is this cruel, that ruler does not deserve respect, let alone worship.
It's an argument that moves beyond logic and into moral outrage.
It is. But the theists countered this by systematically dismantling what they identified as two false assumptions underpinning the skeptic's challenge.
Okay, what was the first false assumption?
The first one related to the nature of God's attributes. The skeptic assumes God is only merciful and omnipotent, and therefore, if a problem exists, he must solve it instantly.
But the theist says that's an incomplete picture.
Right. They counter that God is also all-wise, Elohim, and all-knowing. God's perspective is cosmic and eternal, while ours is limited and temporal.
And this is where they use the doctor analogy.
Yes, which really grounds the concept in human trust. We accept a doctor's painful prescription, a difficult surgery, not because we understand every step, but because we acknowledge the doctor's superior knowledge and wisdom.
We trust that the temporary suffering serves a larger beneficial purpose that we just can't grasp at the moment.
And the theist applies this concept to divine wisdom. Human suffering may serve a wise function that is simply incomprehensible to our limited human minds.
Okay, that's the first false assumption. What was the second?
The second was the belief that there is no good reason for evil. The theist offered 4 specific, detailed philosophical justifications for the existence of suffering under an all-wise God.
Let's go through them.
1. Life is a test. The primary purpose of life is moral and spiritual testing. Without good and evil, without wrong answers and challenges, the test is meaningless.
So hardship is necessary for genuine moral progress.
2. Developing virtue. Suffering is the essential medium for developing noble human qualities. Without injustice, there is no need for compassion. Without oppression, there's no need for courage. Darkness defines light.
So evil defines goodness.
3. Free will. The vast majority of suffering, murder, war, rape, is the consequence of human free will used incorrectly, not God's direct decree. The Creator provides the tool, but the human is accountable for its misuse.
The person who uses a knife to murder is the criminal, not the manufacturer of the knife.
Precisely. And 4, and this is crucial, recompense, akhirat. For the innocent who suffer, especially children, there was the promise of eternal recompense in the afterlife. Their temporary, time-bound suffering is exchanged for an infinite, eternal reward.
Which, from an ultimate perspective, would render their suffering worthwhile. That concept of akhirat is absolutely essential to the theist position, isn't it?
It is. It allows them to address suffering that is clearly undeserved, like the death of an infant. Without eternal recompense, that suffering remains philosophically pointless. It closes the loop.
But the skeptic was not swayed by this. They argued that the test analogy itself is morally objectionable.
They were. The skeptic challenged the logic of the doctor analogy, asking, would you trust a doctor who intentionally causes suffering just to test your fortitude?
They compared the divine test to testing a child by blowing them up with explosives, a morally repugnant act.
A morally repugnant act that no decent human parent would commit, regardless of the ultimate lesson learned. And the skeptic broadened the critique.
Right. The sheer scale of the chaos caused by 7 billion conflicting free wills.
All the wars, the hunger, the systemic cruelty is just too vast and too random to be overseen by a ruler who claims to be omnipotent and just.
So the only logical conclusion for the skeptic is that the ruler is either incompetent,
or worse, is actually on the side of evil. The ethical objection, the skeptic insisted, defeats the logical possibility of the necessary being.
As the debate neared its close, the conversation moved beyond those foundational arguments to look at the limits of knowledge itself. How do we know things, and where are belief systems headed in the modern world?
Well, the theists started this section by making a really critical philosophical distinction. They reject scientism, not science itself.
Okay, explain that. Science, as we established, is a method for understanding physical reality.
A wonderful proven method. But scientism is the belief system that asserts that science is the only valid source of knowledge.
I see.
The theist argued that by limiting reality solely to the empirically measurable, scientism willfully ignores non-physical realities like consciousness, morality, and purpose, which are the core domains of philosophy and religion.
The skeptic, though, countered with a historical broadside, pointing to the long, documented history of religious institutions actively opposing scientific progress.
They did. They cited specific examples, like historical opposition from religious authorities to new technologies like steam engines, or the enduring ignorance in some religious texts regarding basic facts like the existence of dinosaurs.
Which contradicts literal interpretations of creation.
Exactly. The skeptic argued that this historical trend suggests religion inherently promotes worshiping one's lack of knowledge, discouraging rigorous inquiry in favor of predetermined answers.
And they moved from intellectual knowledge to social dynamics, offering a pretty cutting critique of religion's social utility.
They did. They claimed religion often behaves like an addiction or a cancer, multiplying beyond moderation and leading to violence and societal destruction.
They cited statistical observations, suggesting that highly religious nations often correlate with political instability, lack of education, and economic stagnation.
It's a powerful analogy. Alcohol in moderation might be socially enjoyable, but its nature is addictive, and it often spirals out of control, causing net harm. They suggested religion shares this tendency to multiply from benign community ritual into a destructive social force.
But what about the argument that religion provides essential community and social connection?
That's where the skeptic introduced the idea of cultural co-option. They noted that many major religious festivals are historically layered over pre-existing secular or pagan holidays.
Like Christmas being moved to December to coincide with pagan winter festival.
That was the prime example. The shifting of Jesus' birthday to coincide with Saturnalia. The skeptic argued that the joy and social connection we associate with these holidays are primarily cultural heritage, not unique religious property.
And this led to the atheist offer.
Yes. If belief in God is primarily valued for social connection, the festivals, the family gatherings, the atheist can and does participate in all of those cultural traditions. Eid, Diwali, Christmas.
Without the required metaphysical assent.
Right. Atheism, the skeptic argued, offers all the social benefits without the philosophical burden.
And finally, they touched on human nature itself. The theist referenced studies from places like Oxford, suggesting that faith in God is potentially inbuilt in human nature. Fitrat.
A kind of natural default setting for the mind to seek external agency.
But the skeptic rejected the certainty of this.
They did, arguing that if it were truly inbuilt, we wouldn't see the rapid, sustained rise of non-believers, especially in the most educated regions of the world. They argued that humans are becoming increasingly logical, reasoning themselves out of this ancient intellectual default.
And this culminated in the skeptic's final provocative statistical claim, which we can call the atheist's math.
An argument based on probability, delivered directly to you, the listener. The math goes like this. If you choose one specific God, say the Islamic God or the Christian God, you are simultaneously rejecting 90% of the other world religions and their contradictory claims.
Polytheism, reincarnation, different afterlives. You are already 90% skeptical.
Yes. The skeptic noted that the religious person already carries a 90% certainty that the other worldviews are wrong. By rejecting belief entirely and opting for atheism, the claim that no gods exist, the skeptic argues they simplify the metaphysical problem.
What are the odds then?
They have a 50% chance of being right if no God exists, and a 50% chance of being wrong if one specific God exists. They claimed this offered a statistically safer, simpler bet on reality than choosing one religion and carrying a 90% chance of being wrong based on the claims of all the others.
That is a fascinating attempt to bring probability to bear on a philosophical problem, suggesting that doubt isn't just rational, but statistically advantageous.
So this deep dive into the debate, it really revealed a profoundly complex, highly rigorous philosophical collision.
And it was conducted with the respect that such fundamental questions deserve, despite the chasm between the two viewpoints.
What stands out is the core tension they established. On one hand, you have the logical necessity presented by the theist, the need for an uncaused cause to logically ground our contingent reality.
And on the other, this is countered by the ethical impossibility presented by the skeptic, the moral absurdity of an omnipotent ruler allowing immense, unbridled, and seemingly meaningless suffering.
An argument they believe defeats any claim to divine justice.
The debate truly highlighted that conflict over the nature of justice itself. We saw the theists argue forcefully that objective morality must descend from an all-wise source.
Otherwise, human rights and justice are just temporary, shifting legal customs.
And we saw the skeptic argue with equal intellectual fervor that justice is a hard-won, beautiful, but strictly human invention, a necessary consensus created by intelligent species struggling to survive and minimize chaos on an amoral planet.
And if God existed and allowed this chaos, he would be unworthy of moral respect.
You know, the fact that these two men, representing such different worldviews, could maintain this high level of intellectual engagement and walk away with mutual admiration, the expert noted they ate together immediately afterward, that's a lesson for us all in civic dialogue.
It is. The pursuit of truth, defined by Ackle, is more important than tribal victory. It reminds us that this search for ultimate knowledge requires both absolute rigor in thought and deep humility in execution.
So, after traversing the necessity of existence and the cruelty of experience, what does this all mean for you? We leave you with this final, open-ended reflection, something to mull over that builds on the fundamental questions raised here.
We explored the logical necessity of a necessary being and the ethical objection posed by unbridled suffering. If we strip away the concept of a divine reward or punishment, Akhirat, if the universe truly is random, contingent, and morally indifferent, why should we as individuals governed solely by random chance and chemistry continue to strive for objective goodness, compassion, and justice?
Why do we value something that the natural world itself knows nothing of? This is the core question that defines our humanity, regardless of our final answer to the problem of existence. Keep asking the hard questions, keep exercising your aklo, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.